This is Echo Zoe Ministries, episode 128 for December 2018, with Andrew Rappaport and Fred Butler, with a roundtable discussion.
Welcome to Echo Zoe Radio, the podcast outreach of Echo Zoe Ministries, where you'll hear about important topics affecting the church today. Our primary goal is to explore a variety of issues while remaining faithful to God and His Word. Stay with us for the next hour as your host, Andy Olson, shares his conversation with this month's guest. Here's your host, Andy Olson.
I'm Andy Olson. Thanks for listening to Echo Zoe Radio. This is episode 128 for December 2018 with Andrew Rappaport and Fred Butler. Andrew and Fred are both return guests, and there's no formal topic for this month, but rather we're having a roundtable discussion. The topic starters for the discussion are those topics that we've covered already in 2018 on the show. And it's a format that I haven't done before, but ended up really enjoying it in the end. I had a fun time, and I hope you do as well. Show notes for the show are available. You'll get a basic outline of the discussion and some additional resources and other links, and you can find those at echozoe.com/128. And then also, just like last month, there's a video version of the show available. If you prefer to watch rather than listen, you can find that at the YouTube channel or at echozoe.com/128 as well. And in other ministry news, before we get started, I've continued working on a revised and updated version of the Lessons in Logic series, and I've posted new videos for that every week, also nicely arranged in a playlist for easy viewing. If you go to the website, you can click on the link to the Echo Zoe Ministries YouTube channel, where you can view those and subscribe to the channel as well. Short 3 to 5 minute videos are intended to be a regular thing going forward, and I'll do as many logical fallacies as I can before I'll move on to other topics that can be covered in small doses as well. So please also consider subscribing to the channel, as there should be new material well into the foreseeable future. And with that, here is my conversation with Andrew Rappaport and Fred Butler. Well, Andrew Rappaport and Fred Butler, a little bit different episode this month. Not something I've done before, but I want to thank both of you for coming on with me to do a show.
You're welcome. Sorry for my problems.
Fred got us off to a late start. Andrew,
I feel special. I'm like, I want to go back, but this is my third time on Echo Zoe. I'm at least
second time this year, right?
Second time this year. So this is like, I think. Well, actually, by the time this airs, this will be next year, right? But
no, it's the December episode.
Okay,
I'm gonna pop it up as soon as I can get it edited and done. It should hopefully be up in a few days.
I'm like up there for like the most, most, what would be the guest who comes back the most?
Most frequent guest? Well, that would be Ryan Hobbit by far, but Ryan's local. He's a friend. You're one of the most.
I'm getting up there.
You're probably one of the most frequent as far as people I've never actually shaken hands with. I've never met in person.
That's a
I
good
haven't
thing.
met you in person either.
Yeah, and you're on. Is this your third or fourth? We did King James.
This will be my fourth time coming on here.
Oh, there you go. You got him beat.
I got to come back one more time.
So I have never done this before. This is kind of a common format for podcasters, but it's something I've never done before. We're just going to do a roundtable. We're just going to talk about whatever. And as a topic starter, or starters, plural, I thought we could talk about some of the topics that we've covered on the show throughout 2018, but we certainly can go anywhere. I'm not going to keep us down to one particular thing. If you want to go off on a tangent, let's do it.
I hope that it's a good tangent, though. It's not something about, Coca-Cola or something. I don't know. That might be interesting. Oh, there you go.
Well, I can give you an interesting Coca-Cola story, but we'll save that for another time.
Yeah, let's do it at the very end.
Well, I'd like to keep it theological at least, but
That's what I'm
All
saying.
right, I'll tell you the Coca-Cola story when I'm in California.
so my first up thing, and I think I've got a great tie-in, at least with Fred, but Andrew, you mentioned before we started that you had some input as well. The first episode I did of 2018 was with my friend Mark Huffman, was a missionary in Odessa, Ukraine for about 12 or 13 years. But now he's with an organization out of Colorado Springs called Entrust, and he kind of more oversees other missionaries throughout the world. And so we talked about missions and whatnot. And the tie-in with Fred was that, Fred, you wrote an article, was that a few weeks ago, a month ago?
Yeah, I wrote that. I wrote something similar to that a few years ago. It's like right after the Strange Fire conference.
Oh,
In
okay.
fact, I think I was tasked to write that for Grace to Use website.
Oh, okay. But it
And,
popped up on the blog.
I needed to find something to write and fill some space. And
Sure.
I think, I've been mining a lot of my old stuff and putting it on bigger platforms. People can read it. But
Mhm.
I think David Platt had made some kind of comment at this SBC, at the SBC convention this past June, I think when it was.
Okay.
And he was saying how, how missions is going out to all the Muslims, and he tells these stories about these Muslims getting dreams. Usually it's dreams about some vague man in white, some figure that tells them to go and speak to a missionary or something like that, and they'll tell you the truth. And so it just so happens the next day, here comes the missionary. And they, allegedly become Christians. That's the gist of the story anyway.
Well, that's the tie-in. Your article was called "The Man in White Appearing in Muslim Dreams."
Right.
And that was something Mark talked about, and he's been doing a lot of work in like Kurdistan and Iraq, Turkey, and some other Muslim areas that he won't name. But he has these stories about these people who are having dreams of Jesus, or visitations in dreams from Jesus, that are leading them to Christianity. And Mark's got pretty strong theology, so he said even himself, he said, I'm listening to it, and we're all pretty reformed, and those are the three of us here, and of course, having worked with Strange Fire Conference and stuff, Fred, you're going to take that with a total grain of salt. Mark's story wasn't quite what you hear from charismatics, and Mark said, it'll stretch your theology. I remember him saying that it'll stretch your theology. But there was an interesting pattern to all the stories that he had always come across of these dreams. It wasn't just that Muslims were having dreams because they couldn't get Bibles, or there was no access to missionaries. There was no other access to the gospel. That seems to be the charismatic line, is there's no other way for them to get the gospel. So Jesus has to cut through and go visit people in dreams. Mark's stories, it was a consistent pattern, 3 steps. And the first one is these Muslims are displaced. They're in ISIS-controlled areas, or what was used to be ISIS-controlled.
Right.
I think they're pretty much gone now, but they're displaced, and they're looking around saying, hey, these are fellow Muslims that have kicked me out of my home and ruined my life, and how could Allah allow that? Why, we're on the same team, aren't we? So that's the first step. That causes them to start asking questions and seeking the truth, right? And then the second step is really the big one, is someone gives them a Bible. Somehow they get a Bible. So they have access to the truth. They have the gospel, pure gospel, not filtered through a missionary. It's just the Bible. And it comes different ways. Sometimes a stranger will walk up and just say, God told me to give this to you. Now, that kind of rings a bell in our minds, like, okay, God, okay, whatever. So, okay, God told you that, whatever. But anyway, they're getting a Bible. And then it's the third step where they're getting the dream. And that's after they've read their Bible, then they start having these dreams of of either Jesus or some Jesus-like figure, and that ultimately then they end up becoming Christians. Not necessarily because of the dream. It's not the dream isn't giving them the gospel. The dream's just kind of confirming the gospel that they've already been reading in their Bible.
See, to me, I would probably be more willing to accept something like that than what you normally hear in these stories, because usually the stories that are conveyed, at least here in the West, is that here you have these Muslims, they had no access to missionaries, and it's like kind of what you laid out is God cuts through all of the, the oppression and the, just the way they reject the missionaries and reject Christianity, and he, gives them a dream, and they start searching around for a missionary, because there they have their dreams are going to be they're energized, I guess you could say, from truth that they already have. They've been reading their scriptures. They've been considering, is this for real about Jesus? And could the Holy Spirit maybe, give some kind of prompting and as it's drawing them to Christ? Well, yeah, I guess you could say that. What I'm trying to or kind of sort of orient our thinking to think right about is the gospel is what God has ordained in scripture to be the means or the mechanism that brings a person to salvation. It's the proclamation of the gospel by missionaries, by preachers. And, I just think God is bigger than governments and, uh, religions hostile to God. They will, he can send a missionary. And I've heard stories of people who have been in Saudi Arabia. In fact, I might have even mentioned this on Twitter when I was kind of going back and forth with some folks. Is there was a fella that I think contacted our ministry, just saying how he was from, if I remember correctly, he was from India. He lived in Dubai or somewhere in Saudi Arabia at the time, and a missionary on the street came to him, gave him the gospel, and he got saved in Saudi Arabia, which is one of the more hostile countries that you have towards Christianity. And so, God can do those things without trying to circumvent the normal means he has ordained for people to preach and proclaim the gospel. That was sort of my concern.
Yeah. Well, it's definitely his story. His pattern is different from what would have been discussed at Strange Fire. This is definitely not the typical charismatic line where that's the only means people have to hear the gospel.
Right. And I think a lot of people do not have that background where it's like, hey, they had the Bible. They had already talked to missionaries, perhaps. They had perhaps even heard the gospel preached to them. And it's as they're kind of contemplating all of these things that perhaps, in their dreams, something clicks, or it, causes them to what you're saying. It confirms what they're hearing or whatever. And then that's when they go back and say, hey, I want to hear more about this truth that you've given me. Well, there you've already have the means by which God has ordained the proclamation of the gospel. It's with the, a preacher or some missionary who's talked to these people individually. And then later, like, I had this dream last night and I need to hear more. To me, that's a little different than someone all of a sudden cold turkey. I had a dream. I knew God told me to come to you. Okay. And it's a Jehovah's Witness or something. I don't know. But
Andrew.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things I think when we look at these things is you have to take a look at the individuals. Are they going, in the wackadoo type of views? I mean, that's what we usually see in America, right? People that claim to have dreams are just theologically off the rocker.
Yeah.
And so there seems to be accounts of people that are having these dreams and visions in these Muslim countries that seem to be solid believers afterwards. They seem to be following a biblical faith. And so it is hard for us. Look, I can't exegete anyone's experience.
Right.
And I can't say when people say, well, what do you do with this? I mean, one of the things, the most frustrating things, and I'm sure both of you have dealt with this, you get someone that you disagree with them on the continuation of gifts, and they suddenly start telling you about their experiences and say, what do you do about this? What do you do about this? And I just say, I can't exegete your experience. This happened to me this week in church. We had a guy who's been coming out to my Bible study, and he asked me, and it's just, I don't know, I can't exegete your experience. I mean,
well, this is, you had pointed out as we were getting ready and waiting for Fred to kind of figure out his computer. We were talking about my Lessons in Logic series that I'm kind of redoing and putting together. And I don't think I posted it yet, but I've done the video for argument from anecdote. This is totally an argument from anecdote. When you say this, what about this? You know, the general rule is X. Well, what about Y? That's not X.
Well, okay. So let's deal with it, because here's the thing that a lot of people don't think about. Our memories, are fail. As we get older, they fail even more. But so there's two things you have to keep in mind. One, your memory will fail over time and you're going to forget things. Second, it only takes a few minutes to interject a memory. And people don't realize this, but it is possible to interject a memory into someone's thinking. So what ends up happening, I think, in some of these cases is someone, like I know of one case where someone said, what do you do about this? This is what happened in my life. And I told someone this, and that's what happened. But the person forgot about it for several years and met the person again. And that person said, oh, you told me this, and it's what happened. And I said, can you actually remember saying all that? Or was it only after they said those things that you remembered? And it was after they said it. And so the reality is some of those things can be interjected into memories. And that can happen because some of the memories are true and some are what someone else remembers and they get interjected. And I've had that happen where, you know, you can have that. So when people are saying, what do you do about this? There's a whole lot of things just outside of the spiritual realm. Now you get in the spiritual realm. Well, they're saying, well, this is of God. And my thing is, well, okay, you're telling me you have all these experiences, but I know Mormons that have those same experiences. How now do you explain those? Because now you're saying that the experience is justifying the theology in the case of continuationism. Well, when you're giving the experience to justify the theology, and the Mormons and the Carolini and these others and the occult all have the same experiences, how does that verify the theology? Now it doesn't. Right. So can it be demonic? Yeah, it absolutely can be, because the occult does it, Mormonism does it, Carolini do it. So now you have to deal with the fact of how do you know within Christianity it's not? And some people say, well, they're solid believers. With these visions, the one thing that I look to is say, okay, are they following in solid gospel, solid theology? There seems to be cases where that seems to be. I don't think all the visions are true, though. I find it a little bit hard to believe that there's that much.
So the dream ends up being almost an anomaly, at least in our minds. It's an anomaly in their overall salvation story for that person. They're otherwise sound theologically. They've got a good testimony where they heard a solid gospel or read it in the scriptures themselves. It's not just something that comes out of left field from this weird atypical source like a dream.
Right.
Well, here's the one key that I always want to look to. How important is that vision or dream to them? I heard one gentleman's testimony, and his focus was on Christ. And the person was asking about the dream. And so he mentioned it, but he kept turning it back to Christ. I mean, that's very different than what we see in American when everyone says, you know, they have a dream, because all the focus is on the dream and it's not on Christ.
And the dreamer, yeah.
Yeah. And that's an important thing. If all the focus is going back to Christ, well, that's what Paul had. If all the focus is on self and the dream, I'm going to have problems with it.
Yeah, right.
Do you have another thought, Fred?
I'm just thinking about, I think if I remember correctly, in my own experience before I came to know the Lord, and I was raised in the Bible Belt, so it wasn't like I didn't hear the gospel. I remember having dreams before I came to know the Lord, and a lot of them were kind of fearful things where it's like In fact, I think one of them was connected to the 88 Reasons Why Christ Will Come in 1988. If you remember that terrible book.
Well, hey,
And
in '89, he had a new reason.
then he had to redo it and make it 9 because he failed. But I remember that book was like all the rage on my college campus among the Baptists, that I were hanging around with. And having scary dreams, that somehow I'd gotten left behind, and it's just some kind of, I think I had like maybe 2 or 3 dreams like that. And it didn't necessarily cause me to doubt my salvation because I mean, I don't think I was saved yet. I think I was just
Mhm.
sort of a professing moralistic kid who had attended a Bible based home all his life and didn't really know any better, didn't really know the gospel. But would I say that those dreams were what kind of began to help cause me to question my salvation? Well, not necessarily. But if I wanted to make some kind of a big thing like, oh man, God was really talking to me and he was giving me all of these, this revelation. I mean, I guess I could turn it into that and make it bigger than what it is. But, a lot of that's probably just because of the hysteria and panic that silly book was causing
Mhm.
in your psyche. You know what I mean?
But isn't that
So,
ultimately then like what's going on is that whatever's happening, wherever that dream is coming from, whether it's your inner psyche or
right.
whatever it is, a demon, an angel, God, whoever, whatever, regardless of the actual source, it's something that he's providentially using to till the soil.
Right. It
So
could
that
very
once
well
you
could
are
be.
saved, you look back on it and say, well, that was an interesting experience, but it didn't lead to your salvation.
Yeah, I think it's more. I've had a lot of experiences where I've had, uncanny works of providence that, you don't recognize it until after everything kind of comes together and you see it. And you're like, wow, this person was here at this place and we were over here at this time. And, just isn't God good? I mean, I remember going to see, I think it was the Smithsonian exhibit that was going around and it was in Los Angeles. And I had a friend of mine that wanted to go see it really bad. He's from Australia, and that's getting down there. And we walked in the back way into the LA Civic Center, which I don't know how we even got into there. And we're milling around kind of in this lobby. And the lady is like, oh, well, this is the will call. You should already have tickets available. Do you have a name? And we're like, oh, well, where is the line for they buy the tickets? Oh, it's over there. And we kind of look across the yard there, and there's a million people walking, down the sidewalk. And we're not going to be able to get in. And right at that moment, this lady said, hey, I have 3 tickets I'll give to you guys for $10. Anybody want to buy 'em? And, yeah. I mean, it was came out of nowhere. We were so grateful that, I mean, and that's, obviously that's just God's kindness. And, my
Mhm.
friend was not going to be able to see this if we didn't get to see it at this time. He was leaving or whatever it was. And so, I mean, you have these events that happen all the time. And it's not to say that God is not doing those things and we give him praise when he does. It's just, it's when they blow them up bigger than what they really truly are. And it's kind of like what Andrew is saying, where the focus is on the dream or the receiver of the dream rather than the actual message of what's being preached and proclaimed and so forth. And is it Christ that is the central aspect of all that, and not, oh, I got this dream and God's talking to me,
Mhm.
Yeah, that was my main concern, I think, when I wrote that article.
Yeah, and that was my biggest takeaway from that episode too. Was it was such a kind of a curveball,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, didn't we when we were talking about this in DMs, I think I even told you that you know, I I'm not, necessarily opposed to people telling stories about seeing angels or having those
Mhm.
kind of encounters because I think those things happen. And I know people have had similar, particularly at death, when people see angelic beings in the
Mazel
room and
tov. What was
everybody
that?
else. What's that? Yeah.
I said Mazel tov. What was that?
Oh, was there like was that someone
It
clinking
sounded
in my
like somebody
house?
dropped a plate or something.
It's probably my kids are making spaghetti, I think.
Uh,
Sorry about that. If I was back in my bedroom, we wouldn't have this problem. So,
If you can get your
that
technology
computer
to
didn't
work.
want to work, what am I doing?
But
Anyway,
I mean, really, this kind of gets into what you dealt with on your second episode with Costi is the whole charismatic movement really started with emotionalism, and
mhm.
he was bringing up some of the extreme stuff where, and I forget the guy's name, where the guy would kick children to get
Oh,
to
Smith
kick the devil.
Wigglesworth.
Yeah.
That guy was a
Or
wacko.
Todd Bentley.
And
Well,
Todd
that's where
Bentley
he
does
said
it
Top
too.
Bentley gets it from is
Yep.
Oh, okay.
Smith
Wigglesworth or whatever his name is, and this
Yep,
guy,
yep.
this guy would like kick children. But it's when you're looking for the experience.
But it wasn't just kicking children. It was like a Holy Spirit kick, right?
Oh yeah, But the thing is that when people are seeking an experience, and the experience is the high that they're looking for, it gives them the euphoria. Then the next week you have to outdo that because you become desensitized to last thing.
Right.
And this is why these people who aren't satisfied with Christ are constantly looking for. I mean, let me fly in on a wire to the congregation as a pastor, and that crazy nonsense, because they keep having to outdo the last experience because it's about the experience and not Christ. And it really shows that either they don't know Christ or they're just not satisfied with Christ. But to me, there is enough in Scripture that we can study about Christ and never come to an end of being in awe of him and being amazed with him. I don't need to look for an experience for that. I can look to Christ.
Mm-hmm.
And I have an experience when I actually read, you get in the Word and there's something that clicks with a passage that perhaps you've read dozens of times before, and all of a sudden you really understand it and you understand the context. And I mean, it comes alive for you. And I've been going through the book of Second Timothy with my volunteers at work, and we're coming down to the end. And just as I've read that book over and over and over and over again now for the last year and a half, and I've had the opportunity to teach, it's amazing how my faith is just strengthened as I've been reading that book, because it's Second Timothy. I mean, you don't think about Second Timothy being this heavy duty book or whatever. Right. It's just 4 chapters. But, now that you understand the context, what Paul's arguing, the practicality of what he's talking about with people who want to gather together, teachers that, hoard teachers that basically tell them what they want to hear. And I mean, you kind of see that playing out in the day's world, and you go, wow, that's, you understand how God's word is still active and, working in that way and is timeless. I mean, that's a wonderful experience. I mean, I'm not speaking in tongues or having God tell me anything unique other than what's written in his word, Second Timothy.
But you're not looking to the experience is the thing.
Right. And I'm looking I want to just know God's word so I can understand it right and give it to other people correctly and teach it correctly,
Mm-hmm. You mentioned about having that light bulb moment where things just click. I taught a Bible study this week, Friday night, we're in Genesis chapter 3, and question, okay, why did God put a tree in the middle of the garden? Why do you make these rules? If he didn't do that, would man have never sinned? And I actually went to Romans 9 to explain, God did this so he'd be glorified, and he wanted to display attributes that wouldn't be displayed without sin. And it really clicked for several of the people. There were people that said it suddenly clicked. They suddenly understood something. And this kind of gets done when, Andy, you had Captain America on.
Chris Onholtz, yep.
Okay, well, he is Captain America, is he not? I mean, he dresses that way. So let's just be real. He's Captain America.
Well, he is to us, yeah.
Yeah, when you had Chris Onholtz on from Voice of Reason Radio, you guys talked about this cage stage of Calvinism. Mm-hmm. And I think what it is, and this is what I said to the Bible study Friday night, is what you end up having is people that they get that aha moment on something. And for many, it's the Calvinism. They get that aha moment of Calvinism, everything clicks, and they stop looking for that aha moment in Scripture, and everything now points back to Calvinism. Yep. And so that's where they get in that cage stage where I had a guy in my church years ago that it was end times. He had a different view of end times, but everything went back to end times. You could be discussing marriage and it's going to end times, because to him, that was his aha moment. And he stopped trying to get to learn more.
I think I've gone through both of those myself, because I was saved through the eschatology. So for the first 4 or 5 years, everything was eschatology for me. That was my focus. That's what and the people that I followed, didn't matter what book of the Bible you were listening to them talk about. They were working their way through this book or that book. It always went back to eschatology. But then becoming a Calvinist, we all go through that phase, definitely.
But see, we need to do like what Fred was just saying, have many of those aha moments. I mean, it's a constant thing of throwing ourselves into Scripture and not being satisfied with what we've already been taught about God's word and wanting to know more.
Well, I think that's kind of, for me as a layman, that's kind of the joy of reading through scriptures, that, like, Fred's talking about reading something that you've read a dozen times before, but reading through it again, like that you haven't read. And because now you've got new experiences, you've maybe built up a stronger theology in a certain area. And so having that built up, that's where you get kind of some of those aha moments is you're like, okay, I'm older, I'm more mature. And so I can see this through maybe a more brightly colored lens.
Well, it's also, I would say, actually, this is working well in conversation through your episodes this year, because your next 2 episodes was me on systematic theology and then Nate Pickowitz on Sola Christos. But that was really the Reformation, which had 5 solas. And that really is the thing. When you're studying through theology and you have a firm foundation of your theology, that's going to ground you a little bit better from saying, oh, I got to go here, I got to go here, I got to go there. Everything's got to be focused on this one thing. Either of those two become a problem, where when you have that solid foundation, you can take what you're studying and it fits in.
Right.
Yeah. And I should mention that that's all providential. I mean, I don't sit down and lay out what's the next year's worth of podcast going to be and how am I going to get this person to come in at that time. But that's part of the joy of it is seeing providentially how some of those things work out and things tie together that you weren't planned, and at least they weren't planned on my part.
Well, you really haven't been doing this for very long.
10 years. Yeah. Not that long. Who just dinged? Was that me or was that somebody dinged?
What is it?
Oh, that was me.
Wasn't me.
I better mute that.
Ding dong! Jehovah's Witnesses. Ding dong! Mormons. Christian, are you ready to defend the faith when false religions ring your doorbell? Do you know what your Muslim and Jewish friends believe? You will if you get Andrew Rappaport's book, What Do They Believe? When we witness to people, we need to present the truth, but it is very wise to know what they believe, and you will get Andrew Rappaport's book at whatdotheybelieve.com.
Welcome back, guys, after having some crazy audio issues, and I'm freaking out because I couldn't figure out why I could not hear you guys. You could hear me just fine, but I couldn't hear you. And so we had an unintentional break, but we are back. And we were, I don't know, we were talking about the provenance of podcast episodes, I think, with systematic theology with you.
Well, we were talking about your 10 years of experience in podcasting, actually.
Yeah, which apparently isn't worth much because
now shows the providence.
Yeah. What is this episode? I didn't look. I'm at like what, 130 or 129 or something like that.
I can't remember.
If I go try to look, I'll screw something else up.
Don't do that.
Yeah, I can look because I had them all.
See, you've been putting me to shame today, Andrew, because I just went back and looked at my show notes to get ready to talk, and you actually listened to all. Did you listen to all 11? You even did
I went through
like the anniversary episode, which is like there's no point in talking about that one.
Yeah, no, I didn't. That was the one that I skipped.
Okay, so you got 10. Still more. That's dedication.
Hey, you asked me to.
I just read the show notes. That's all I did. Like you asked me to.
I guess you don't have. All right, let me see. You don't have the numbers in there, but
Well,
My
if
thing
you
says
go like
25
echozoe.com slash
episodes.
say
Is
echozoe.com slash say 128. What episode is that?
all right. I'd have to go out to Echo Zoe. Now you have a lot of editing to do.
No, this is Roundtable. We can have some off-topic discussion.
I will say that Andrew is doing a phenomenal job transitioning in our conversations to all of your stuff on your little show notes that you sent to us. He makes it just smooth and easy. It's like what Crossy Hen said, and
well, I think, well, yeah, because he did a better job than the host in preparing, and and even though I've got 10 years, you've probably got more episodes than I do by now, don't you? I mean, you're doing these little like 3-minute things. You can probably go up to like what 1,000 episodes now.
Yeah, I'm over 250 episodes.
Yep.
So yeah.
Wow.
Your show is a great one to binge. You and 5 minutes in church history.
Well, actually, okay.
Yeah, that's a good.
So
that's a good
you know,
topic.
I think I gave breaking news the last time I was on that my daughter was going to get married. So I'll give you some breaking news again. We're going to be actually splitting my Rappaport podcast into two, the Rappaport Daily and Rappaport, so that we'll do the weekly will be on the Rappaport. So you'll get that hour-long one. Rappaport Daily will be just Monday through Friday, the 2-minute, so you can binge on that. And what usually on Saturdays, what I do is if I do a series during the week, I wrap them up and do a wrap up on Saturdays. So that I'll put onto the Rappaport. So there may be times where there's 2 episodes, a 1-hour version, a 10-minute version on the Rappaport. And then the dailies are just going to be dailies, so you can binge on them all you want.
Well, those short ones are great binge shows. Like I said, this isn't the time of year for it, but in the summer when I mow the lawn, I like to load up these good short, 5-minute shows. 5 minutes in church history is a good one. And when I mow the lawn, I just listen to like 10 of them all at once.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, I enjoy those. There's a couple of short ones that you get, and I'm just trying to look through.
It's too bad you don't have a graphic for that. We got your book here on one side, and we've got the ministry on the other side.
Oh, I can change that in a minute if you want. But the dailies, if you are interested in Mormonism, there's a short about 15-minute one called Viewpoint on Mormonism. That's pretty short. The one I do enjoy, it's called 5 Minutes of Truth with Danny Parvis, and it's usually like 6 to 8 minutes long. So I love the title. It's 5 minutes of truth, and it's never 5 minutes. But he has some good stuff, on some of the shorter ones. Answer in Genesis has a 1 minute long one. There's a new one that, and I'm not sure if I don't know that I agree with his view on evangelism, but there is a pretty decent podcast that's short, and it's called the Practical Christian Podcast. It's usually like 7 to 8 minutes long. But I mean, the only thing is I've heard him say, like, for evangelism, invite someone to church. Being an evangelist, that's not evangelism. But
well, if you go to a good church, at least they'll hear the gospel. It might not be the best way to do it, but at least they'll hear the gospel.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't know if I mentioned. Well, I think I did bring up the lessons in logic. That's kind of my latest thing. Is I'm trying to put together short little like 3 to 5 minute videos on. Right now, it's going to be logical fallacies. I'm just going through old material that was in my lessons in logic series, and I'll
have like animations like Gabe Hughes does with his.
Well, yeah, Gabe gets a little too fancy. I'm not fancy like him. I just like get that green screen back there and like turn it into a PowerPoint slide.
How's that? Is that better for you? You like this better?
That's like 10 years old. You have a more recent picture.
Is that like were you?
No, actually, that's not. That picture is only I think 3 years old, 4 years old.
It looks heavily photoshopped.
Did you use Photoshop or something?
Actually, no. The gray seems to be stress related. I get if you look, I get this streak. I look like a skunk, right? It comes and goes. I don't people accuse me of dyeing my hair because it'll be gone at times, but no, I don't do that. It's just, I think it's stress related.
Oh.
I had a little bit of stress. There's a thing called a wedding that I was helping plan and then pay for. Now we're really off topic.
Mm-hmm. We're moving away. We're way back talking about the 5 solas and systematic theology.
We're on the 5 solas before we talk about Yom Kippur.
Before my computer exploded and we had to
Yeah, the Yom Kippur episode was really good because I agree with Ryan's sort of take that the feasts of Israel's feasts were definitely, I think there's some prophetic significance to those. Whereas you have the spring feasts were connected to Christ's first coming and his events and that sort of thing. And the second group of feasts that are going to be coming around, and like 3 of them or so, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, the fall feasts were...
The fall feasts. I mean, I remember having a Free Will Baptist preacher when I was growing up insist that Christ's second coming will happen in October, in the fall of the year, because he believed that those feasts had some kind of prophetic significance, which they very well could, as it pertains to Israel and to God's timetable with them and them coming back to him working out his plans, and they all fit together quite well. And that seems to be what in Daniel's vision, in Daniel 9, he kind of mentions about wrapping this all up and bringing a completion of these things and atone for sin. Well, okay, atone in what way? Well, that's when Christ comes back and deals with Israel and they believe upon him, and you know what I'm saying? It's just I really liked that episode. That was a good one.
That was a thing when I was in seminary. I frustrated many of my teachers, my professors. One of the things I had trouble with, mostly because of my Jewish background, was why did Christ come on Passover and not Yom Kippur? And I asked every one of my seminary professors this question because it was one that I really struggled with.
I mean, why was he crucified on Passover?
Yeah.
Whereas atonement was specifically making atonement for the nation.
Yeah.
And
I'm thinking the cross is the atonement. That is the atonement. Why is it not? Why don't we see this? And so it was something that was really frustrated me. And it was for not till many years after seminary, I heard someone basically teaching through the feasts. And in teaching through the feasts, he pointed out all these significant events, much like Ryan did, all these significant events that happened in Christ's life on a feast day. And it got me thinking, could Christ, and Fred, it's sort of what you just said, could Christ choose, when he comes back, may it be that he comes back on Yom Kippur? We don't know what year, obviously, but the point being is, could that be the thing, that he's going to come back on Yom Kippur and then that would fulfill it? But he fulfilled 4 of the 7 feasts, I think it was, and there's 3 more. And depending on your end times view, there could be 3 more major events. And so it was very interesting to see. And he's only the second person that I've ever heard speak about it that way on something that I've always kind of struggled with myself. So I really remember
right, you had reached out to me kind of privately shortly after I posted that because I remember you now sharing your experience and how that answered long time questions that you'd had. And so I had appreciated that Ryan was able to do that. And I was also appreciative that you had pointed that out. That was a blessing to hear that.
Well, the whole thing with I can't remember which order they are in. His trumpets come before.
Well, I think Yom Kippur comes first. Isn't that the
and then
New
there's
Year?
Tabernacles, which would mean that
there's trumpets
Christ,
and tabernacles. Yeah.
And the trumpets, I'm not sure. I was trying to think chronologically with his second coming. Obviously, tabernacles is the idea that you're now with God. together. Together there's fellowship, and what that would mean is Israel. I mean, God's dwelling, which I would say here on earth. They're with their Messiah. They're with their God, who is going to be with His people, and it's not just Israel, but it's everybody whom Christ is Christ's people. The trumpets, I was trying to think of where that would fit in, if that's just sort of a feast that deals with the announcement or the arrival of Israel's true Messiah, or how that exactly would fit in. But I mean, I've been researching for some time, just off and on, my personal studies, just whole Ezekiel's temple vision, and just its whole just all that it entails. I just the whole all millennial, post millennial view that this is somehow some kind of elaborate, vision or typology of the church or whatever. I'm not buying that. There's something to that vision. It's a real place that's going to really exist. And a lot of the imagery is found, it talks about making atonement and all these things. Well, that's not atonement in what we're thinking about with Him dying for sin, as it is, cleaning the place, cleansing it, and God coming to dwell with His people. And it's more of an issue with God being holy. I've made you holy. Now come and be in my presence, kind of thing. And yeah, that was just that was one of my favorite episodes, I think, that this past year that I remember listening to. Stirred up all of those thoughts in my head, which I like, when you stir up thoughts in my head and I can ponder them, over and over again.
Now, the thing that I took away from that I thought was interesting, just a little tidbit, was when he pointed out that Yom Kippur is the feast where no one knows the day or the hour, because it falls on a lunar calendar.
Right.
So as it's approaching, they know it's coming. I mean, they know the general time, but they just don't know specifically exactly when it's going to happen. And they have watchmen waiting for that first full moon of the year. And then
I thought it was the first new moon of the year. Isn't that right? I can't remember.
Yeah, I wasn't sure about that myself. I mean, I guess I didn't know. I mean, we just have, the rabbis would just tell us when it is. So I never thought much of it.
Yeah, it's in the show notes. I'll look it up quick. I thought it was full moon because they're looking for it, because they said that sometimes if I remember him saying that if the sky was overcast, and they would have a special difficulty finding it. Well, with a new moon, you just don't even see the moon at all. So,
right. Yeah, I had to go back and can't remember if it was full moon or new moon but I know what you're saying. I thought that was a good point too, that he was kind of pointing out, that there is something that's there's something that's undetermined about that. You know it's coming, but you don't have any kind of day or hour exactly until it happens. And then there it is.
Oh, no, you're right. You're right, Fred.
We know the day and hour. Harold Camping said it a couple of times.
No, Fred, you were right. According to my notes, he did say new moon once they saw the new moon heralding the first of the month. But yeah, they wouldn't know that. They didn't have the moon plotted out, the cycles plotted out as well as we do in the 21st century. So they'd be looking for it. Is it here? Is there a sliver of moon left?
Right.
But so that was the tidbit that I took away. I thought was interesting. But that's one thing I enjoy about Ryan is I never ask him to do a specific topic, because he's always got interesting stuff, and he's kind of a Walter Kaiser and he really likes Walter Kaiser in that, and he's strong on the Old Testament. That's one thing I love about Ryan is it's easy to kind of let the Old Testament fall by the wayside, but he doesn't do that. He's really strong in tying that to the consistency of theology throughout Scripture.
So he's not unhitched from the Old Testament like Andy Stanley is?
No.
Okay, so I've wanted to do this, and Fred, you might be a good one to do this with, but I want to do a podcast on the Rappaport and go through every New Testament book. Play the clip from Andy Stanley saying about being unhitched, and what I want to do is go through every New Testament book and look through each book to see how much reference there is to the Old Testament. How much would you have to unhinge?
Right.
Here's an interesting thing. If you want to unhinge yourself from the Old Testament, Andy Stanley, you have to remove every New Testament book except one. Because every New Testament book has an allusion back, every New Testament book has an allusion back to the Old Testament except for one. Can either of you guess which one that is?
Are you going to say Philemon?
Philemon, exactly. And he won't like Philemon.
I was going to
just like Philemon because it talks about slavery, which is why he wants to unhinge the Old Testament.
Mm.
So I think that's kind of comical that the reason he wants to say we have to unhinge it is because of things like slavery, and yet the only New Testament book that doesn't have any allusions to the Old Testament deals completely with the issue of slavery and sending a slave back to his master.
Right.
What would he do with that?
Yeah,
well, he wouldn't do anything with it because he had already unhinged himself from the complete Bible. It's just about the resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
Now we're getting into now we're kind of getting right into what you talked with Gabe Hughes about with culture, right? Christianity and culture.
Yeah, that was interesting. We just talked about he does those short videos. They're usually 90 seconds long, and he'll hit a topic. I can't be as strong,
precise.
As strong with the graphics and the animations. I think you brought up earlier.
Yeah.
But you know what? It seems like it's going to be really hard to do those short videos like he does. But I'll tell you, at first when I started doing the short Rappaports, the daily editions, they were 5 minutes long, and I thought there's no way I can get down to 2 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And after doing it for a while, you start to figure out exactly how much information you can fit into 2 minutes. And you learn it.
But Gabe has always been 90 seconds. He didn't start at 5 minutes and work down to it.
You don't know that. You don't know how many times it took him to get down to 90 seconds.
Yeah, he's made it clear that it's a challenge. And
it's a rating. He's
it's 90 seconds too. It's not 87. It's not 93. He goes for 90 and he tries to hit it on the nose. And it's incredible how he can. It's got to be that radio background. It really has to be.
Well, it's when I do my Rappaport 2 minute, the daily, and I'm looking at the audio wave as I'm speaking, and I know where that end is. I see it, and it's just a matter of knowing right as I get there how to end it. And as long as I know what I'm going to say, I have it there. There's time. The only times I really had some difficulties, and this is some of the stuff you were talking about with Gabe, was social justice issues. This is when the Statement on Social Justice came out. Mm-hmm. I actually did a 2 minute for 15 days. I went through and read every one of the articles on the Statement of Social Justice in the Gospel.
I brought up mowing the lawn. I can actually, how you ever listen to James White and he'll tell you like, I was biking on a certain hill at a certain spot when I listened to this thing. And
Yep.
I can see where I was in my lawn mowing as I'm listening to you talk about social justice.
But, some of them I had time to elaborate. And toward the end of those longer ones, I had to retake them a couple times to try to fit them in 2 minutes. And if you listen to those, you hear, I'm from Jersey. We know how to talk fast, but pastoring at a Chinese church, I had people that had to translate into English. And so I had to learn to slow up. But I could talk fast, and you'll hear that on some of those. I start speeding up the cadence to get it in 2 minutes, but I made it. But there are a lot of issues with our culture, though, that I think all of us, and there's people close to Fred there, grace to you, who really have been affected by taking a stand on the social justice issues. And really our stand is not that we're against justice, as so many people are trying to say. we're against changing the message of the gospel, because the message of the gospel is the justice. That's where you're going to get the justice that people are saying they seek. That's in the gospel.
And it's funny you mention that, because it seems like every generation has to figure that out for themselves, that people appreciate when you take a stand and you stand for scripture. How many denominations have gone liberal and then atrophied, and they just kind of go off into nowhere because they don't take a stand? People stop coming. There's no tie. There's nothing to keep them there. People move on and they go find a gospel preaching solid church that takes a stand. And we're seeing that in some of these evangelical churches now, where people are just getting so squishy, and they might see a surge in attendance for a while, but they're eventually going to atrophy, and they're going to shrink up and go away.
Yeah, I agree.
Well, I think wasn't there some sort of a survey or something that was released recently where they were the Christianity in America and churches are closing kind of thing. But when you actually went and read the data and saw the churches they were talking about, a lot of them were these liberal churches that nobody really attends anymore, because what's the point if you don't believe in Jesus, or if you don't believe the Bible's true, or if you all of these things that define Christianity you reject. What's the point in going to church? I can sleep in on Sunday morning. I got other things I can do.
Well, the church just becomes a social club.
Yeah.
So why go to one that is being looked down upon by our culture and is becoming the pariah of our culture? Why not go to, if it's just a social club, you can go to the Kiwanis Club or whatever.
I mean, when you can have a denomination that's filled with pastors who will say that they won't even say that they're Christian, they'll say they're atheist, but they're still a pastor of a Presbyterian church or an Episcopal church or whatever, or Lutheran church. Is that a church? I mean, I think even unbelievers can see that it's not.
Right. Yeah, it's
you can watch the Hallmark Channel if you just want feel good stories, right?
I know.
Yeah,
which are kind of lame stories if you think about it, and get to go to the Hallmark.
Come on, Fred. We know you watch them all the time. Your wife and kids are all asleep, and you're sitting out there,
looking at the Hallmark.
You pretend you tell us that it's really Star Trek and Star Wars.
Oh yeah, I know.
But it's really Hallmark.
It's about some widow woman who about the Louvre farm, and gunslinger comes in and trying to get.
I don't even know what he's referring to.
I'm just making it up off my top of my head. I used to have a friend that worked with me, and
wait, stop.
I know, a friend of mine. And we would look at all that people would bring in the Amish romance novels and leave on the giveaway table, which I'm thinking, why are people reading Amish? And I said, Brett, let's look at that cover. I can tell you the story about what this book is about. This woman, she's like in trouble with her parents, and this guy back here in the background, is probably the guy that she loves, but he's not, completely Amish, and she's got this conflict.
He's Mennonite.
He's Mennonite. He's not Amish, and there's been a house fire. There's probably somebody got hurt or something. And
he secretly stops by in his pickup truck.
Yeah, he always he drives a truck.
After dark, he turns the headlights off.
That's why she's in this field, is because she's isolated, because from her family, which is.
You guys have watched too many of these things.
I'm just making it up as I go. I don't know.
I know. It's like, yeah.
Sure you are. Meanwhile, there are some listener out there that's saying, "Oh, I know exactly the name of that movie."
Yes, the red hot Amish romance novels. Anyhow, who thought Amish women look so pretty too? That's another thing I always find. They're always blonde, and they look like they belong on Fox News reporting the news or something. It's hysterical. Anyway.
Okay, so about foster care and adoption.
You're going to make sure we
The
actually
Amish,
hit every
they're really
episode,
good
aren't
about
you?
foster care.
Hey, I did my homework. I want to make sure we're.
You did. You're a good point. Let's make sure that you listen to all of them.
Which actually, on that episode, I learned some things about Jason. I know Jason, and not real well, but I did not know. Yeah, I mean, I knew he did have some kids that he fostered and all, but didn't know all the background that he provided in that. And that was kind of a very illuminating episode on something I really didn't know much about, and the issues of adoption. And I mean, there's if you guys know Andy Lewanski from Track Planet, he also used to be a foster parent, and he did an episode where he was talking about that. It was just very eye-opening to someone like me who doesn't do that, and the ability they have to share the gospel and give some structure to those kids was, really was good. And I guess really, if we're going to connect it with your previous episode, Christianity and the culture, where the culture is turning against Christianity, you see that in the area of adoption and foster parents, because Christians are very quickly not being allowed to be foster parents or adopt, because they won't tell a child that if you think you're a different gender than you were born, they won't say, yeah, that's a good thing. And so it really does. Fostering for Christians or adopting for Christians is really starting to become a difficult thing, I think, in our culture.
Yeah, I really like that too.
That episode, but I did appreciate that. Because I know people who are always interested in that, and so it gave me kind of a resource. Hey, you may want to listen to this guy tell his testimony about doing this, because I hear people talking about, oh, you ought to do this, like it's some kind of easy thing to do, and it's like, no, there's a lot of struggles you're going to have to be prepared to wrestle through, if you're going to do that.
But Jason does a great job he doesn't hide those struggles at all. I mean, he tells you they're going to be there, but he also shares that there's a reward that makes it all worthwhile.
Right.
He talked about there's a phenomenon called making up for lost time, where if you got a little bit older kid who was neglected or abused earlier in life, didn't get some of those typical things that kids get when they're growing up, like bedtime stories or bath time or whatnot. You'll find like a 12 or 14-year-old kid who wants to do what 2 and 3 and 4-year-old kids do, because he never got it as a kid when he was that age. And that's kind of both a struggle, and he also says it ends up being something to bond over. So it ends up being a reward in the end too. And seeing kids come out and seeing their lives straighten out and head in a much better direction, and seeing how God blesses these kids through what you're able to provide them.
Well, not just a better life, but really salvation. I mean, to share the gospel, which really brings up, the last episode you had, which is how salvation works. That's Yet Allen and this book here, which is
book here,
From Death to Life, and I have to admit it was cheating for me, because I'm going to be interviewing Alan when I get done reading the book, and which I hope to do in December. But it was.
Or you could just listen to my interview.
I could, but I like to prepare, as you could tell. But it really the issue of salvation becomes the most important doctrine that we want to focus on, because look, you can get every other doctrine right. You get salvation wrong and you're going to hell. It doesn't matter that you have the Trinity right. I mean, the Catholic Church has the Trinity right and still sends people to hell because they have salvation wrong.
Right.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that you brought up with him on that episode was the distinction between sanctification and justification, because there is that difference, and it seems that so many mix those two up, and that's where you get into people that say you can lose your salvation. Almost every person you talk to thinks you can lose your salvation, you look at it and they're mixing up justification and sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
They kind of make sanctification. I was just going to say they make sanctification somehow before justification some way. I'm doing these things,
Mhm.
so I'll definitely be saved. And like, no, you got that backwards. You're
Mhm.
sanctified because you're saved. Your life
Mhm.
has changed. That's the issue.
The other thing people mess up is that you can fall into basically legalism, where you understand that your salvation came through Christ, but then you think that you're sanctified through Moses. You think that, oh, now I got to go follow all these Old Testament rules and make sure that I do everything exactly right and I don't upset God, or I'm not going to be sanctified. But even Galatians says that who of you beginning it by the faith or by the Spirit continue on in the flesh, and so it's important to realize that we continue the same way we started. We continue through faith because we started by faith.
Yeah, and that's the thing that confuses me with people that think you can lose your salvation, because they start by faith, they lose it by works, and then they gain it back not by faith, but by works.
Yes.
And they'll talk about, now some will say you maintain your salvation by works, and once you lose it, you're done. Okay, at least that's going to be consistent if they're going to interpret Hebrews 6 and Hebrews 10, because those two passages that so many people use to say you can lose your salvation clearly say it's impossible.
Once you lose it, you don't get it back. Yep.
Yeah. So if you're going to say you can lose your salvation, it's a one-shot deal, which becomes a problem, because in those passages in Hebrews, it talks about a sin, conscious sin, and they'll what they try to do is say, well, I didn't willfully sin, and that's their excuse. Well, it wasn't willful, so it was an unwillful sin. Therefore, I don't lose my salvation. Except every sin is willful, right? I mean,
Yes.
you acted out, but the reality is that's just justification for that, and really what it is you have to have a proper understanding of what salvation is, what we're saved from. And when you have that right, things fall in place. And really, to get that right, you have to, and whenever you talk about theology, and I probably talked about this on my episode with you, it always has to go back to the attributes of God. If you have the attributes of God right, you're going to get theology right. But you're going to often see these people, oh, well, God looked down the tunnels of time, saw who was going to be saved, and chose them. That's how election works. Okay.
I had that discussion yesterday.
Yeah. And so what do they do when they do that? Well, you're making God, he's no longer omniscient. He had to observe to know something. Second, he's bound by time. He's not eternal. So you just corrupted two of his attributes. Therefore, that's not the God of the Bible, and that doctrine's wrong.
I remember you sharing, going back to your episode, sharing in.
No, I skipped over that one.
I know you did, but when you are explaining to an Arminian the doctrines of grace, how you walk them through the 5 points of Calvinism, basically, but you don't make it obvious that you're doing that.
I don't use the points. Yeah, I don't.
Well, you reword them in such that.
No, I just give the definitions.
Well, sure. There you go.
I did this. Look, there is a very well-known evangelist. I don't know, Fred, should I mention his name? You know who this is, I'm sure. Who hates Calvinism? Is one of the most.
A lot of those individuals.
Well, okay. So I'll name names, and we'll let Andy decide if he'll edit it out. But I had a conversation with Mark Cahill. He beat it out. But I sat there with Mark and went through every one of the 5 points and gave the definitions. And when I was done, I said, Mark, you are a 5-point Calvinist. No, I don't believe it. And then he gave his false definitions of Calvinism. And the reality is what he believes fits within Calvinism, but what he thinks Calvinism is a false definition. And that's why, I disagree with his false definition of Calvinism. His definition of Calvinism, I don't agree with, which is why when people ask me, I say I'm not a Calvinist, because I don't know what they mean by that term.
I was in this discussion. I was in this discussion yesterday. My brother is a plumber, and I need a little plumbing work done, so he came over and helped me out. And he's adamant that he's not a Calvinist or an Arminian. He's in between, right? He thinks they're both true. Well, that is by definition Arminian, especially if you start walking them through the points. They'll say, well, that's what I believe. So I thought what I really need to do is print him out the 5 points of the Remonstrance and the canons of the Synod of Dort and say, which one of these two do you believe in? Which one do you agree with? Because I know he's going to look at it and say, well, I agree with the canons of the Synod of Dort. Well, that makes you a Calvinist. So.
Yeah. Well, that would make you, sort of an Arminian if you're, following Jacob Arminius, but Jacob Arminius' followers didn't follow him rightly.
Well, when he says that he's in between, he immediately goes to what you're saying about looking down through the corridors of time and seeing who repents and has faith, and that's who God chooses, right? Well, that's one of the 5 points of Arminianism, one of the 5 points of the Remonstrance. That's an actual point. That's not like a summary of a point. That's the point. Right. But they don't understand that.
Well, because they haven't actually read those documents, most of them.
Well, that's why I say, and if I call them the 5 points of the Remonstrance and the canons of the Synod of Dort, he's not going to know what they are. He doesn't know enough church history to go back and say, that's Calvinism versus Arminianism.
No, if you word it that way, he's probably going to think, because you're mentioning 5 points. You're
they're both
actually,
5 points, though.
Yeah, they are. But if you call one the 5 points and the other you just say the Council of Dort, he's going to immediately associate the 5 points with
that's true.
The 5 points of Calvinism. So you're actually kind of bringing
tricking him,
to his thinking. So
poisoning the well.
Yeah, just say points. Yeah. Otherwise you're poisoning the well there a little. Mm-hmm. Not really, but.
Well, guys, I think that even with our unintentional break, we're over an hour, so good time to. We don't have to wrap up right this minute, but good time to kind of head in that direction. Is there maybe something else that you guys have been working with? Maybe in your Bible study classes, any theology that's come up that you think would be fruitful for the discussion before we close?
Well, the heresy of Butlerism.
Yeah, you did mention that. I got a text message saying.
What is that heresy? Explain that.
I
sent Andrew a text message and I said, did you send Andrew, could you shoot Fred a link to the Zoom meeting? And I gave your email address. And he said, no, he's a heretic.
There you go.
Wait, isn't that the way we're supposed to respond to people online? Oh, wait, no, that's not what Captain America said on your...
Oh, yeah. Not everybody's a heretic. Yeah. He's a heretic.
And so I was thinking we were going to play an old-fashioned Todd Friel game of Explain Yourself, Mister.
But there's no more time.
Do you guys remember that? Do you remember that he used to do that? Or was that before your time?
What was that?
The Explain Yourself, Mister bit that Todd Friel used to do?
He does that every once in a while.
Does he still do that?
That with Phil Johnson sometime when he does his...
Well, it's not the Too Wretched for radio
stuff.
It's not Too Wretched for Radio. This goes back to, I think it might have either been the Way of the Master radio days or even before that. He started here in the Twin Cities.
Yes. He told us all about it.
And his original show was called Talk the Walk.
He was on the radio.
So that was before he met Ray Comfort and was doing...
Right.
Well, he was having Ray Comfort on once in a while on Talk the Walk, doing these Witness Wednesday type things and whatnot. And then after they'd been on the radio, he had Ray on many times. Ray was kind of becoming a regular. Finally, I think Ray said, hey, why don't we join forces and you could do a Way of the Master radio. So that's when that happened. And then he did that for a while and then started going towards Wretched.
Yeah, he was at Grace to You a couple of weeks ago, and we had we bought him Chick-fil-A and stuff to
I
eat
thought
with
he
us.
was what's the
Yeah, he's a
Atlanta place?
Zaxby's guys, but we
Zaxby's?
don't have that in California.
I've never even heard of Zaxby's.
Zaxby's is like chicken strips.
Yeah,
It's kind of like
Fred took me there and was
and then
bragging about it.
I
And
know, hey,
dude, I
everybody
wanted to go
was telling
somewhere
me,
else
I
for
like
dinner.
what I got. Andrew got some kind of weird thing. Is this is terrible. Like we should have got the normal thing, not this weird thing.
All right, this year G3, I'll go do the normal thing with you, and we could see if it's really that good.
We can go to that. We can go to that sushi place again, get the steak.
Now,
That was good.
now we're talking.
At any rate, but yeah, he was giving us a background to all of his, story, his life story and broadcasting. It was very well done. I don't even know if anybody recorded that because we did it in our room, one of our rooms where he had a microphone because we could hear him. But his story was really quite remarkable because he was originally like a stand-up comedian.
Yeah,
Yes.
something weird like that.
Yeah, and he would do and so he kind of learned how to have this rapport with the audience and everything, and he just kind of button heads with the station managers and individuals like that, and his whole encounters with Ray Comfort and just them joining up, and eventually I think it was Insight for Living in Atlanta, Georgia. That's Charles Stanley's group that gave him the opportunity to come down to Georgia.
Oh, okay. So that's what's got him down there, huh?
Yeah. So they gave, hey, well, you can do like a video thing, which he wanted to kind of do. And so he went down there, moved down there. And I think eventually they split ways. It was good, but so that's why he had like, I think a year or so ago, and then he had like kind of a moving into a new studio or something like that.
Yeah.
I think.
Well, when they moved into the studios, they were in Charlie Stanley's the ministry of his studios in Atlanta. That's where they were doing it when he left Way of the Master, and they went out on their own as Wretched, and that's when they got those studios where they're at now. And there were a lot of reasons. I think, some of them just the way that the studios operated were very different, and Todd wanted to be able to I think just do things the way he thought it could be done.
But his story is kind of interesting. He would be a great interview just to have him kind of give his testimony about how he started doing what he started doing. Because he spent about 30 or 40 minutes just kind of reviewing all that and all of his stand-up gigs and all of the places.
Well, he'd go on with Andrew, but I don't think I've asked when I've talked to him before. He says he'll come on with me. I can't get hot for real. He's one of the. He's my white whale.
Yeah, I had him on.
He would do it if he would do it,
Yeah, he's really good. He's the one thing with him. He's really, really quick-witted.
Yeah, he
and
is.
if you're not ready for that, it's just like you don't know where the conversation is going to go.
Yeah.
Well, guys, thanks so much for doing this. I think this was a fun format, and
we'll have to do it again.
Yeah, we should. And, the thing we have to mention, it wouldn't be right for me to be on here and not bust on a little bit here, Andy. We should mention, because the last time I was on here, we talked about the hashtag Justin I Win campaign.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that. Is that battle still going, or did you actually finally win?
We've upped the ante. Let me help you out with this. You can go to JustinIWin.com. That's right. There's actually a domain with a website that gives you the history, and you actually get to see the look on Justin's face as he discovers live. We recorded, like, when we revealed to him that we had a domain, JustinIWin.com.
But you actually put something there?
Huh?
Oh, did you put somewhere there? Or is it an old-fashioned domain smack? Do you know what a domain smack is?
We have a video that explains the history.
Okay.
We got some pictures of me winning against Justin, and then you got to scroll a little more to see where Justin. Well, I choke him out at Shepherd's Conference, and just suffice it to say, he choked me back. And there's some pictures of him choking me out. And then there's a link where you can donate to Justin Peters.
Oh,
and just
you
put
know
in
what?
the comments, hashtag Justin I Win.
I saw on Twitter, I think it was earlier today, he had a rock that he picked up in the valley where David picked up a rock to slay Goliath. You better watch out, because that man's coming for you. No, I thought maybe you did a domain smack. Are you familiar with a domain smack? It goes about 10 years back, maybe longer. A domain smack is when you buy a domain as kind of a jab against somebody, and then you forward it to their site. So, JustinIwin.com, you could send to Justin's domain.
It does. Well, it does. It goes to his donate page.
Well, but it would go directly, not through your site. You wouldn't get the story. It would just go directly to his donate page.
Yeah.
That's why I wondered if it was a smack.
No, we're giving the story. It
was actually a very clever marketing tool by one of the domain registrars about 10 years ago, is they were sponsoring podcasts and YouTube type shows and getting people to do this because they'd sell domains that way. Because people would think, oh, look at this funny smack I came up with and I paid $15 for it. It was clever marketing is really what it was.
Yeah, well, you will enjoy going there, and there's a little video there, and there's a link to donate to them. You'll appreciate that, I'm sure.
So we can get live status updates on the Justin I Win battle too.
Well, so basically, here's the battle. I won at Shepherd's Conference last year. He won. He won when I was in Kootenai Community Church. That's his church, and so it's tied. So we need a tiebreaker.
How did the Israel trip come out? You were sending people on his Israel trip, weren't you?
No, I wasn't doing that. But there is a chance that he and I may both be doing an Israel trip. We may do it in 2 years. We're talking about doing a trip to Israel.
Oh,
so
you and I were talking. Yeah, you were talking to me about it. Are you kind of moving past that and found a better deal?
No, so the deal is that I was at my daughter's wedding, like just enjoying the wedding. And instead the entire board of directors, other than me, was at the table, and they decided they were having a meeting. So when I'm making my way around to every table, I get to their table, and they're like, we had a board meeting. We've decided Striving Fraternity is going to Israel in 2 years. And I'm like, oh, we have? I'm like, who's organizing that? And they just looked at me like, of course you. Yeah.
Well, so I can put you in touch with the right people. and that was the episode. That was an episode we skipped in there too. Was my my tour guide.
Yeah, you did. I noticed that because there were 2 times you spoke about Israel, and the other one that was missing from your list was the one from Israel. So I didn't bring it up.
Well, I didn't. Yeah, because I thought Aaron really just talked about life as a believer over there, and I don't know what the 3 of us have to add to that discussion, or how we can pick up on that.
One of us can identify with life as a Jewish
an Israeli Jew. No, you two do have some similar stories going back though.
Yeah. And I did have the family who wanted to, we had some rough times there for a while as far as communication, and I mean, he had his family stop talking to him for a while, but
his dad took out an obituary for him.
Yeah, well, my parents went casket shopping. When they found out, before I knew they found out, they went casket. My dad sat me down and said, we went casket shopping, and here's why we didn't buy the casket. You were going to be dead to us. And there was something that happened in the family. And so, yeah, I expected it, actually. That was the reaction I expected they would do.
I hate to break up this little snooze fest here, but my wife is coming in and she'll need the computer to do.
Well, I've been doing. I'm the Minnesotan, and I'm doing the Minnesota goodbye. So we can wrap it up.
I'd love to stay and chat some more. I have to go. So.
Well, my wife's going to be bugging me any minute now. Are you still going? So, well, thank you guys.
I always enjoy seeing you, Andy.
Why don't we shoot this? It was a good time of year.
You notice how he did that? I always enjoy seeing you, Andy.
You're both of you. Yeah, Andrew.
Well, you did call him a heretic.
Yeah. I like seeing Andrew as well. I don't see him very often in person because he's across the United States. But
hey, once a year, I come to your place for breakfast. So
I know you do.
Well, make it a
We'll
road
have to
trip. You can
arrange that
stop by
again.
here. I'm
Yeah.
kind of on the way. I got a bedroom now. This place right here got me out of another room over there, so I have a bedroom now.
Oh,
Well, hey,
that's nice.
Andy, thanks for having us on. It really is a privilege to be on your show and be able to just to talk, especially with guys like Fred Butler. Is it's a privilege.
It's
It's just
Thank you.
you get Fred Butler here, and you and I look stupid. It's just
I know.
he's up
I
here, we're
added
down
so
here.
much.
You know,
Well, I make no bones about the fact that I'm not the expert. That's why I get guests.
And you have good guests. I will have to tweet out this episode.
Yeah.
Tell everybody to listen to Echo Zoe. It's only a once a month podcast too, so it
Yeah,
doesn't
it's easy.
overwhelm your time. And
You can binge a whole
good.
year's worth in one day.
yeah, you could.
I did.
That's what he did. All right, I got to go.
Yeah, thank you, Brad.
Echo Zoe Radio is an outreach of Echo Zoe Ministries. If you are blessed by the show, please consider offering your support. There are many things you can do to help, including prayer, sharing the show with others, and your financial support. Echo Zoe Ministries is a registered nonprofit organization with 501c3 tax-exempt status, and your donations are tax deductible. For more information about how you can support Echo Zoe Ministries, please visit echozoe.com/support.
Well, that wraps up episode 128. Thanks for listening to Echo Zoe Radio. For show notes, visit echozoe.com/128. Be sure to check out the website also for links to connect to Echo Zoe on social media. We're on Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube and love to connect with you. So follow, like, and subscribe to Echo Zoe Ministries. You can also help us get the word out by sharing and retweeting announcements for future episodes. And Lord willing, we'll be back next month for the January episode of Echo Zoe Radio.